Hello, fellow fleet and mobility players. So I hope all is well on that side of the camera. Let me tell you about our expert talks guest today. After spending more than 26 years as an Army logistics officer, our special guest, she kicked off her consulting business and which focuses on fleet management, mobility, sustainability, and the ever important field of training and development. Working in both the private sector and the public sector, among her clients has been the UN, NATO, NAFA, and others. And currently, she is the fleet director for Matrix Consulting Group. So I'm happy to introduce to everybody Catherine Vigneau. So talking to us, she's not in Canada. She's in Canada, you're around the Novus, but she has some time to take some time out because she's in a hotel in North Carolina, right? Very busy, right, Kate?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and but you live up north in the Nova Scotia area.
Yeah, I'm currently have my home is just outside of Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Oh, I see a lot of isn't that where the Aurora Borealis is, or I guess you
Well,
call it
it
the Northern
stopped by
Lights?
this year, yeah, but yeah, after all those years in the army and being away from home for almost 35 years, I finally moved back home to Nova Scotia, and I'm really loving it.
Okay, cool, cool. Yeah, so I guess we just have a few questions for you today. And I guess first of all, so there's a lot of new stuff going on in fleet and mobility, and probably the biggest changes, I guess, ever since we were born, or at least ever since I was born. It's been a while. So there's a lot of things that are going on. My first question is, what distinguishes fleet management from mobility management, and how would you say they influence each other?
Well, first, thanks for having me. It's so nice to have a chance to talk about some of these topics. And this topic reminds me of when we first met at a mobility conference in Brazil some years ago.
Yeah, you're in
And,
Brazil.
you know, in fact, I think that some of those early conferences in Brazil, and I attended their Parar conferences for 5 years in a row, I think that that really shaped my thinking on mobility and mobility management. So I see fleet management as a subset of mobility management. So mobility is the full range of options to get people and materials from where they are to where they need to be. Whereas fleet is one way of doing that. That's, owning some vehicles and moving your people or your equipment supplies to where they need to be. Mobility, though, gives you a whole bunch of other options. So, employee reimbursement programs, leasing, public transport, micro mobility, walking. So, there's a whole bunch of other ways to get there. The challenge I'm seeing right now in a lot of our organizations is that all of these mobility options come under different people. So reimbursement might be under HR, whereas obviously owning vehicles are under fleet. But all the mobility options can influence each other. So if you have a more generous reimbursement program or reimbursement regulations, you might need fewer fleet vehicles. And I believe we need kind of a mobility umbrella over these things. So an organization is actually making the best mobility decisions, not just the best fleet decisions.
And you have experience with both the public sector and the private sector. And how would you say is creating, a corporate fleet policy maybe different than developing one for a government fleet?
Well, let me start by saying what's not different. So I really believe that most organizations do not spend enough time creating and keeping effective policies up to date, and they do that at their own detriment. But nobody has the time like to get around to doing the policies. So I believe a robust policy framework consists of three documents: a fleet policy manual, which is the fleet manager's guide and communication to other departments in a corporation or a government organization about what their responsibilities are and how fleet is going to do things. Then they need a driver handbook that communicates to the driver or operator what their responsibilities are, what you do in times of a crash, and basic rules of the road like wear your seatbelt and don't drive drunk, and distracted driving policies. Very important. And then the third document is service level agreements. So I like to see service level agreements between fleet's internal customers and also between fleet and their outside providers. So even if contracts are in place, there's so much in a contract that is subject to interpretation that sitting down to create really strong SLAs is really worth that exercise. So that's what's the same. Now, within that framework, are there differences? Sure. So, corporate fleet policy may emphasize more driver reimbursement, um, car sharing, a bunch of financial policies, may have more on leasing that most government organizations aren't doing a lot of. So I see a lot more in that content, whereas a government fleet policy, for example, will have a full chapter on maintenance procedures if they own their own shop. So we'll talk about work order processes and kind of maintenance compliance. So, whereas the basic structure is the same, and I'd argue even the chapters of the policies are largely the same, there's going to be slightly different content in a couple of areas to emphasize those differences. And then you bring in more specific organizations like universities, for example, you're going to want to have policies for student drivers. And that's the case for all kinds of organizations. And I always try to really tailor a policy to the organization's need.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I've seen that because I cover all the Americas, so all the way up from Canada and the United States, all the way down to South America, where you got, got Brazil and Argentina in between. And I'm seeing that there are a lot of government fleet operations in the United States. But I'm also interested in this because both of us have worked for the government before, and yeah, so it's good to know the differences. But like you said, a lot of it is the same, and it's good that you
Yeah.
pointed out those 3 points that you said: the manual, and the guide and stuff like that. Um, I wanted to ask you a little bit about electrification because many fleet operators, they're looking toward, of course, electrification nowadays is a hot topic. What would you say are the steps to ensure a smooth transition to electric vehicles or EVs?
So, firstly, you're right. Actually, fleet electrification is the biggest growing part of our consulting business right now because everybody's reached the point of saying, is this the time? Is it too late? Is it too early? What should I do? And fleet managers and organizations are looking for concrete steps. You got to start with this, and you can't forget this. And if you follow all these 10 steps, then you're going to get there. So I'll just quickly, I got to put my glasses on for this because I don't want to forget them or get them out of order here. But we've done about a dozen projects in the last year to 2 years for organizations, a couple of utilities, mostly cities, who are electrifying their fleets. So start off creating goals and targets within a framework of the organization's sustainable fleet plan. Most organizations have some kind of strategic sustainable plan or a green plan or a climate action plan. So the fleet plan should be nested in that. and it should have a baseline measurement of greenhouse gas emissions and then goals and targets as you transition the fleet to EVs. Next off is before you even start transitioning, organizations should do a utilization review of their fleet assets. There's no sense transitioning an asset that is underutilized and really shouldn't be part of the fleet. So do your utilization review, right size the fleet, right type all your assets, and then right fuel your assets. So as part of the utilization review, you ask the questions about where a vehicle is domiciled at night, how many miles it travels every day, what kind of equipment it needs, so that you understand if an EV can do that job. So utilization review serves to right type, right size, and right fuel the fleet. Next off, you do a replacement plan so you know when each asset is due for replacement. Then I like to do a market analysis and see what's available in that state, in that local community, in terms of alternative fuel vehicles. Availability differs greatly across the country and between our two countries. So it's really important to know that you can get a vehicle before you create this great electrification plan. So now we're at the point where we have a replacement plan. We know which vehicles are suitable for electrification, and we know what's available in the market. And so step 5 is to create a multi-year plan for conversion. Um, and some of these steps are simultaneous, and this one certainly is that you need to develop the charging infrastructure and have it available before the vehicles arrive. So yeah, you need a rough idea of which vehicles are being electrified in which locations in which year to start your infrastructure planning. But then you've got to be really proactive and make sure that infrastructure is there. Another one that can be happening as all this is happening is what I have as step 7, which is research and apply for grant funding. There's all kinds of opportunities available on both the vehicle and the infrastructure side, so that's really important. Next off, again, as vehicles are arriving, you revise your maintenance plans and schedules. There's some literature now, not a great deal, on use cases from other case studies from other organizations who've done it. So do your research, make the adjustments that are needed. Step 9 is make sure the training's in place for your mechanics and drivers on the new requirements. And finally, step 10 is really an ongoing one as well, because it's the change management and communication strategy that explains to the organization what is happening, why it's happening, and what their role is in the whole electrification transition.
Yeah, see, there's a lot of steps, a lot of things you have to do before you even think about buying a vehicle. You need to prepare and do some homework first to really make sure that you're doing it the right way. Um, and what about training? Because you work a lot, work a lot with training as well. So I don't know, how significant is training for a large fleet operations? And also, could you give us an idea of what is the most effective maybe way to monitor the performance afterwards?
So I think you know that I was the director of professional development for NAFA Fleet Management Associations for about a decade. So I was responsible for the training and development of all their education and their certification program, the CAFM program. So I'm very committed to training and development. And I think you understand as well, having a military background, training and development of your people, they're your key resource. So those two experiences make me place this very high on my priorities. So when I talk about training development, we need to talk about training for the fleet managers, for the mechanics, and for the drivers. So for the fleet managers, very few people in high school said, geez, I want to be a fleet manager when I grow up. So we didn't necessarily seek out specific degrees or specific courses that would help us achieve that goal. So a lot of people end up in a fleet management job by accident. Maybe you are in finance and you are in charge of buying the vehicles for a corporation. So somebody says, "Oh, we've decided to create a fleet section. You know something about vehicles. You can be in charge of that," right? When in reality, I think a lot of fleet managers would really benefit from a program like the CAFM program. And APWA also offers training in fleet management, as do a couple of other associations. So, training for fleet managers, absolutely critical. Next, we come to our mechanics, and there's mechanic shortages across the country, both countries. Mechanics are increasingly challenged by very high tech diagnostics, and vehicles are getting more complex. It's getting harder. So, a plan that invests in those mechanics is absolutely essential, and it should be a professional development plan that they have input into, is a formal written down plan, maybe part of your assessment system. And then at the end of each year, you measure the progress on the plan to ensure that they're achieving their training goals. And then finally, for drivers and operators, I, we can't assume that people know. You can't assume that they know what a level 1 or level 2 charger is. You can't assume that they know how to um, fuel a vehicle, how to charge an electric vehicle, how to do a pre-trip and post-trip inspection. So I'm a really big believer in driver training. I believe in a annual, if you can, defensive driver course. I think it makes for better drivers, fewer crashes for sure. So invest in your people. You'll have a safer organization. You'll have more motivated people and people that are more committed to the organization because you're investing in them.
I've seen that because in some countries, at least in Latin America, there is a lack in also driving. Besides driver training, is that like you said about the mechanics. A lot of them they don't know too much about how to repair the electric vehicle because you got some got to be you're dealing with energy and stuff like that. And what do you think about up north in North America? Do you still feel that there's a lack of know-how, or I've been to some training states as
Yeah,
well, but or do you think it's getting a little bit better now?
yeah. There's a little bit of we don't know what we don't know. We don't know if we're even going to have our average mechanics in a city shop or a corporate garage fixing, touching batteries. Most shops are saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to get out of that vehicle well before the battery is going to be replaced. Um, there is now an ASC certification for EV technician, electric vehicle technician, not emergency vehicle technician. They've had that for a long time. So there are emergent sources of training. So I'm confident that the industry is responding and that it's an achievable objective as we are transitioning fleets to familiarize the maintenance staffs with the new technology.
Yeah, I've been to some award ceremonies for the best mechanics. Where they have stuff like that. You get fleet manager awards, you get mechanic awards, and speaking of award, what would you say? Okay, so for the title of the best fleet, what three key elements are needed to achieve the title of the best fleet or the fleet operations?
So yeah, I'll give a shout out here to one of my buddies, Tom Johnson, who was the father of the 100 best fleet. And he brought that to Brazil as well and recognized fleets in Brazil to try to enhance safety. And Tom and I had this conversation many times. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. And when I first took over the military fleet, I took over a fleet of 32,000 vehicles. And I wasn't directly responsible for every vehicle. Of course, they're dispersed across bases across the country and deployed overseas. But I had the policy oversight and controlled some of the contracts that dealt with these vehicles. And so what I tried to set up at the time, and which most of these contests, including Tom's, really focus in on, I think we'll call them like four pillars. So the first one is training, because you got to invest in your people. You have to have a trained professional staff to have a successful fleet organization. Um, the next, and they may not be in order, but technology, a system, as things get more and more complex. I don't know how anyone can run a large fleet these days without GPS and a fuel system and a fleet management system that all talk to each other and collect the data that you need to make decisions about fleet. The next step is budget. Um, Fleet is really, the economics of fleet say that we have to replace our vehicles at a certain amount of time, or it's going to cost our organization more money. So delaying the replacement of that truck from 10 years to 15 years is not saving you money. It's going to cost the organization money. It's just going to delay the, the acquisition or capital outlay of cash. So we have to have the money in order to have the vehicles that are needed to support operations. Because let's face it, a fleet doesn't exist in a vacuum. You don't have a fleet of vehicles just for the sake of having vehicles. You have them to support the main purpose of the organization. And if you don't fund and replace them properly, then you can't support the organization. And then underlying all those pillars is sustainability. So I don't know what the future holds, but I'm very hopeful and optimistic that it holds a greener planet, and a place to leave for my 7 kids and 5 grandkids that is going to be at least as good as we found it, and hopefully much better when we leave it. So we all have to be sustainability managers. Um, and I just want to say one more thing, because I'm again thinking of our Brazil friends. When I talked about people, I talked about investing people in people. I also should mention the safety of people. And in addition to being fleet managers, we're sustainability managers and we're people managers, because we got to get them home safely at night.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, well, with that said, I just have like maybe I'm thinking about one more question about looking into 2025. What major challenge besides upholding sustainability, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
and safety and stuff like that? As a last note, I go, what is there any what major challenge should the fleet operators maybe anticipate in 2025, and how can they prepare for it? How can they face it, or maybe even overcome it?
So I tell my clients all the time, I wish I had a crystal ball because things in this industry have changed so much in the last 5 years and will continue to do so at an even more rapid pace. But what I'm seeing the most of now, and what I think the challenges are going to be um, enduring challenges for the next at least few years, are old fleet and old facilities as one, so aging fleet and buildings, and the second, how to keep up with sustainability, how to keep up with electric vehicle transitions or whatever fuel comes next, be it hydrogen or another energy source. Um, we still have COVID, right just in the rear view mirror. Um, in the COVID recovery, we're still trying to figure it out. We're still trying to figure what back to office means. And I walk into company offices that are like a ghost town because they build these big facilities and now people are all working from home. Is that permanent or is that temporary?
I see some of them coming back, but not still. There's a lot at home. I I, I like working at home, and I don't have to deal with traffic and I have to do stuff like that. But it's good to see people face to face, of course. But yeah,
Yeah, so I don't know. No crystal ball. I don't know if that's sticking around. Some organizations still have too many vehicles because they bought a whole bunch of extra vehicles during COVID because they couldn't put two people in a vehicle. So each person had to be in their own vehicle. Or they have too few vehicles because they contracted all the services they were providing and then for a time couldn't get their hands on new vehicles. So, which of these changes are permanent, which are temporary? Not sure. But I see a real need for people to understand what their fleet size should be, invest the appropriate amounts of money in getting their fleet within life cycle and keeping it there, and then addressing the aging facilities and providing, fleet maintenance shops that will meet the needs of the future.
Good. I guess let's wrap it up there. That's good. Thank you once again, Kate, for your time, and have a good trip back to Nova Scotia and your family there. And you gave us a lot of important information to know. So that was, yeah, very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for having the conversation. I really enjoyed it. Take care.
Okay, take care, everybody. So, and also thanks to all the viewers out there. And remember, we'll have other expert talks. We're covering all the Americas. And once again, Daniel Bland, Fleet Mobility Today, signing out. Talk to you later. Thank you.